G'day, Anthony. My question, I'm an owner-driver from Kings Langley up near Blacktown.
Yep.
It's about the fuel excise. I'm hoping that you can match that from Peter, because I know you've offered tax cuts and that's great, but I believe they're not for 15 months. And to be honest, Mr Prime Minister, people are hurting now, not in 15 months' time. So, you know, the fuel is dialed into everything, not only personally people's cars, but for me and other truck drivers, it makes the supply chain cheaper and cheaper and cheaper if fuel's less. And I'll say to Peter too, if you've only promised it for 12 months, extend it. Extend it for 3 years. Extend it for the whole term. And then I think Australia as a nation will be happy.
Ian, thank you. PM?
Well, thanks very much, Ian, and thank you for what you do. As an owner-driver, truckies do it really tough. It's a tough job that you do to keep the country moving. And one of the things that happened during the COVID pandemic, of course, was that you did keep the country going, along with our people in our hospitals and retail and in aged care. It was magnificent the way that Australians got through what was a very difficult period. Look, we have to make decisions, and we were concerned that just a temporary measure, just like it happened prior to the 2022 election, it then just disappeared after a period of time. And what Peter's proposing is something that is temporary, that will, of course, because of the nature of it as well, kick in for a period of time, increase the deficit in the short term. What we have looked to do to target cost of living measures as cost of living measures that put downward pressure on inflation, which is why we have been successful in getting inflation down to 2.4%. There's more work to do, but that's why we produced 2 budget surpluses. We've halved the deficit that was anticipated this year, whilst putting in place what measures we can to provide that cost of living support when people need it across the range of areas that we have done.
Mr Dutton, 3 years for Ian?
Well, Ian, thank you for your question. I do think fuel and the tax that's applied to fuel is a huge impost across the economy, which is why we've taken the decision, because a cut in the fuel excise, the fuel tax, it means a 25 cent a litre reduction, not just for families and small businesses, but also for pensioners and other people across the economy. And as you rightly point out, it takes some pressure off the supply chain. So it means that, you know, when you have a look at the fuel bill you're paying, think about the tradie as well, who might have 3 or 4 utes running around and the cost each week being paid, or delivery truck drivers, farmers delivering produce to supermarkets, etc. That's where the real benefit is in the economy. I just make this point in terms of whether you make a decision about making it permanent. Good governments respond to the circumstances in front of them. And as I pointed out before, when we approached the COVID period, we looked at what economic things and decisions that we could make to make it easier for families and businesses to survive through that period. We didn't bake them in permanently. We provided them on an ongoing basis. We renewed them if we thought that the economy still required that and people still needed that support, which is exactly the approach that I want to take. So it costs $6 billion a year. It's a lot of money. The Prime Minister's tax cuts cost about $17.4 billion over 4 years, and then over $7.5 billion a year ongoing. Now, my argument is that there are many ways in which we can provide support, including tax cuts, and we would reassess where we are as an economy, as a people, as a nation in 12 months' time. And if we needed to extend it, then we could do that. But I would just say that if you bake it in and you put it as a continuing cost that continues to compound, because every dollar that Anthony Albanese is spending at the moment is borrowed money, and that has to be paid for. So we just have to get the balance right.
Does it make us more vulnerable not having those buffers that we've had in previous crises? In hindsight, would you have put more money, saved more, because we've got another shock, as Michael quite rightly points out, the Trump shock? Are we more vulnerable now because of the 10 years of deficits forecast?
Well, one of the things that we did, Kieran, of course, was turn a $78 billion deficit we inherited. We turned that into a $22 billion surplus. And then we turned a deficit of more than $50 billion into a $15 billion surplus. We've saved $250 $107 billion, the bottom line is better off since we came to office, and that's made a big difference. And Ian, can I say, I was talking to a truckie friend of mine the other day, and one of the things that he pointed out about Mr Dutton's plan to stop working from home was that if you put all those cars, on the one hand they're saying, yeah, we'll give you some cheaper petrol, but on the other hand they were saying that people would have to drive more. And one of the things you know about being on the M4 here or the M7 is that on the days, particularly Monday or Friday, because of working from home days, those increase on those days, it's easier to get around. That's one of the reasons why we put in our industrial relations policy, the right to bargain over work from home, and why we support it. Peter is now saying he does or he doesn't, but we think that's an important measure as well.
Kieran, I just want to pick the PM up on a couple of those figures, because the reality is that the government today was bequeathed a set of books where we were in balance. And that's what happened when the Prime Minister was elected. Now, the Prime Minister can scoff at that, but that's the reality, and Australians know that. Now, we had a situation over COVID where debt was run up, as we mentioned before, but the government has been able to achieve 2 surpluses off the back of Liberal Party economic management. And now, in the most recent budget, you've seen that debt goes to $1.2 trillion, and deficits, that is, the government's running at a loss in every budget in every year forward. Now, if they were such good economic managers, why would it only be in the first 2 years after a Liberal government they've been able to achieve a surplus? And now, from now on, and I'll just make this point.
Why don't you use the opportunity to ask the PM a question, just directly, put one to him and PM can reply?
Are you the biggest spending government since Whitlam? So 40 years, in 40 years, there has not been a higher spending government than your government. Is that correct?
Well, that's not true, except for the one that you were a part of.
It's just not true.
And during COVID, of course it's true. And it's also true that there was a $78 billion deficit planned in the 2022 election. You had the March 2022 budget. The election was in May, and money splashed out, including the cut to fuel excise. All this money out the door, a $78 billion deficit projected. We turned that into a surplus. We had a $100 billion turnaround. Debt is $178 billion less now than what it was anticipated to be in the March 2022 budget. The previous government promised a surplus in its first year in 2014 and every year thereafter. They never delivered one. The only governments that have delivered 2 budget surpluses in a row is the one that I lead in the last 20 years, going back to the Howard government.
Mr Dutton, if you want to reply, you can, but haven't you lost the moral high ground because you've copied most of the government's policies, including Medicare and various other commitments yet to come, like the ADF spending, which we're still awaiting?
Well, Kieran, a couple of points. One is that this is the highest spending government in 40 years. That's the fact. Now, the fact is, as the Prime Minister alluded to, but didn't quite get to the truthful point, over COVID, he supported all the spending that was committed to by the coalition and $50 billion more. That's what was proposed by Labor at the time. So let's put all of that on the record. We have opposed $100 billion worth of spending under this government. They've spent an extra $425 billion, and that is why Australians have lived through basically 2 years of going backwards in their own household budgets, and it's why they're racking up $1.2 trillion worth of debt.
Mr Albanese, your question now to the Opposition Leader. Thanks.
Well, my question to Peter is that you have opposed every cost of living measure that we've put forward over the last 3 years in government. You now are going to an election with a nuclear plan that will build 7 nuclear reactors that will cost $600 billion to provide 4% of power sometime in the 2040s. What are you going to cut to pay for it? Because the private sector won't fund nuclear reactors because it doesn't stack up. So taxpayers, including everyone in this room, is going to have to pay for this nuclear plan. Well,
Anthony, with respect, that's a very dishonest proposition you put. So the CSIRO report puts the capital cost of nuclear at about $120 billion. Now, your plan, independently costed by Frontier Economics, a company used by the Labor Party and probably the best economist when it comes to looking at energy policy in the country, puts the Labor Party policy of renewables only at $600 billion. Our policy is 44% cheaper than that, $231 billion in total, $331 billion in total. The Labor Party's proposal is $263 billion more. Now, the Prime Minister, Chris Bowen, has never disputed that figure. There are 29 nuclear reactors being built in China at the moment. The United Kingdom Labor government has just announced that they can't achieve net zero by 2050 without cutting down on the approval times for small modular reactors and nuclear in those systems. We are paying 3 times the cost for electricity compared to Ontario, where they have nuclear in the system. In France, there is 70% nuclear in the system. Our policy is to make sure that we can underpin our economy with a stable energy market for the next 100 years. So the amortisation period, or the life of the nuclear reactors, lasts between 80 and 100 years, and that cost is spread over that. I just say, if the renewables are so much cheaper, as the Prime Minister keeps telling you, why has he broken his promise of a $275 a year cut to your electricity bill, when in actual fact it's gone up by $1,300 under this government, and families are struggling to pay their bills? And the difference between the two policies is that our policy is 44% cheaper, and in the interim, we increase the supply of gas into the market, because gas helps create electricity. Gas helps create steel and bricks, and it will help with the construction sector, where we've got huge cost inflation at the moment. It will help bring down the prices for farmers and manufacturers and producers. And at the moment, the gas that we're exporting to foundation contracts and to many of our partners is important, but there is a lot of gas that's exported that we could turn back into the domestic market. We can reduce, as the independent analysis has shown, the cost of gas by about 15%, and that means we can bring down the cost of electricity. We can bring down the costs across the economy otherwise, and that is, I think, transformational for our economy, but of course opposed by the Prime Minister.
Well, let's hear from him.
Well, the only gas policy that the Coalition have is the gaslighting of the Australian public. He disagrees with all of the experts which are out there, whether it's the Australian Energy Market Operator, everyone who looks at it. If the nuclear plant stacked up, the private sector would invest in it. But everyone who looks at it says it's the most expensive form of new energy. What we support is renewables backed by gas. We introduced the Future Gas Strategy. We have the gas security mechanism that we introduced in Parliament that they voted against to guarantee that domestic supply. So we want renewables backed by gas, backed by batteries, backed by hydro. 24 out of the 28 coal-fired power stations in Australia announced their closure during the former government. They were there for a decade. There was no new coal-fired power stations built, and there was no nuclear plant.